When you think of Angus Young, the unstoppable guitarist and co-founder of AC/DC, it's impossible not to picture his signature schoolboy uniform, his duck walking across the stage, and the way he could turn a simple riff into a thunderous anthem. Angus has always been about raw energy, stripped-down rock and roll, and letting the music do the talking. But make no mistake, when it came to speaking his mind, Angus never pulled punches. Throughout his long career, Angus wasn't shy about voicing his frustrations with certain musicians and bands. Some he criticized for being pretentious, others for being too commercial, and a few simply for being the opposite of everything he thought rock should stand for. These weren't just casual digs. His opinions shaped how people saw him, and in many ways, they showed exactly why AC/DC stood apart from so many of their peers. So today, let's dive into the 6 musicians Angus Young is said to have despised the most. Trust me, some of these names will absolutely shock you.
6. Elton John. We begin with Elton John at number 6. Now, Elton is celebrated worldwide for his flamboyant outfits, his piano-driven hits like Rocket Man and Tiny Dancer, and his incredible stage charisma. But Angus Young? He never shared that admiration. In Angus's view, Elton's brand of pop music leaned too much on theatrics and glitter and not nearly enough on raw musical power. While Elton dazzled audiences with feathers, sequins, and oversized glasses, Angus thought it all distracted from what mattered most, the sound. Rock and roll, to Angus, wasn't about costumes or choreography, it was about sweat, electricity, and sheer energy blasting from the speakers. Angus reportedly commented more than once that Elton's music felt made for the radio, polished and safe, instead of dangerous and raw like true rock and roll should be. To him, Elton was more about spectacle than substance, and that put him firmly on Angus's dislike list.
Number 5. Madonna. At number 5 is Madonna, the queen of pop. By the 1980s, Madonna had conquered the music industry with her daring reinventions, controversial music videos, and infectious dance tracks. She was a master at staying in the spotlight. But for Angus Young, that was exactly the problem. He never considered Madonna a true musician. To him, she was a carefully designed marketing product built more on shock value than on genuine artistry. Angus reportedly dismissed her career as one long publicity stunt. He didn't see a songwriter or performer in the traditional sense. He saw someone who treated music as a fashion accessory. While Madonna was breaking records and redefining pop stardom, Angus couldn't connect with her work. He believed she represented the direction the industry was heading, image and controversy over talent and musicianship. For men whose band thrived on raw riffs and straight-ahead rock, Madonna stood for everything he couldn't respect. 4. Kurt Cobain. Sliding into number 4 is Kurt Cobain, the grunge icon whose band Nirvana redefined rock in the early 1990s. While millions embraced Cobain as the voice of a generation, Angus Young had a much different perspective. To Angus, Nirvana's music stripped rock and roll of its fun. He saw Cobain's approach as too bleak, too self-destructive, and too focused on misery. Angus built his career on making music that thrilled audiences, music that people wanted to blast at full volume to feel alive. But Cobain's heavy, angst-ridden sound felt like the opposite of that. There were reports that Angus criticized Cobain for turning rock into a dark and depressing genre, robbing it of the joy and adrenaline that bands like AC/DC had always championed. Angus never hated Nirvana's success. He hated what it symbolized, the rise of a style of rock that wallowed in despair rather than celebrating life. For a man who lived to make audiences lose themselves in the excitement of a riff, Cobain's music was too heavy-hearted to admire. Number 3. Phil Collins. At number 3, we have Phil Collins, beloved by many both as the drummer of Genesis and as a massively successful solo artist. Collins was everywhere in the 1980s. From In the Air Tonight to Against All Odds, his songs dominated radio, MTV, and movie soundtracks. But to Angus Young, Phil Collins was the very definition of everything wrong with commercial pop. Angus reportedly mocked Collins' style as music for people who don't really care about music. In his eyes, Collins' ballads were overly sentimental and polished within an inch of their life. While AC/DC kept things raw and greedy, Collins represented glossy, radio-ready perfection that Angus thought sucked the soul out of rock. The dislike reportedly grew stronger after Live Aid in 1985, when Collins performed to massive applause. Angus, who also played that day, was said to be unimpressed, muttering that the audience was cheering mediocrity. For Angus, Collins symbolized the shift towards safe, formulaic pop that sold millions but had no real bite.
2. Bono from U2. Coming in at number 2 is Bono from U2. Now, U2 is one of the biggest bands in the world, known for their massive stadium tours, soaring anthems, and socially conscious lyrics. But Angus had little patience for Bono's style, especially his habit of turning concerts into political platforms. Reports claim that Angus often rolled his eyes at Bono's onstage speeches, saying that fans came for the music, not a lecture. He believed Bono's constant preaching made rock concerts feel like sermons, when they should be explosions of sound and fun. Angus respected authenticity, and while he could tolerate showmanship, he couldn't stand pretension. To him, Bono's larger-than-life personality crossed that line. Instead of focusing on the riffs and the power of the music, Bono seemed to be focused on his message and his image. For Angus, that wasn't what rock and roll was meant to be. 1. Sting. Finally, at number 1, the artist Angus Young despised the most, Sting. The former frontman of The Police and a hugely successful solo artist, Sting was praised by critics for his intelligent lyrics, jazz influences, and sophisticated songwriting. But for Angus, all of that sophistication came across as pretentious. He reportedly described Sting's music as overcomplicated nonsense, the kind of stuff that tried too hard to sound important. Angus was blunt. He thought Sting's songs were boring. He once joked that listening to Sting felt like sitting through a dull lecture instead of enjoying a rock and roll show. To Angus, Sting embodied everything rock should never be: too polished, too serious, and too full of itself. In Angus's world, rock and roll was about energy, excitement, and keeping things simple. Sting, with his careful arrangements and intellectual errors, was the polar opposite of that. And so Sting claimed the top spot as the musician Angus Young hated most.
Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.